Persecutor, Devastator, Ravager, Intimidator. These are the names the Empire gave its own ships. Not Defender, not Guardian, not Peacekeeper. Ravager. Did anyone in that Navy ever stop, look at their assignment orders, and ask themselves, are we the baddies? The answer is more complicated than you want it to be, and that's the point. See, we love to paint the Empire in monochrome. 1,000,000 identical helmets, 1,000,000 identical minds. Cogs in a genocide machine, indistinguishable from one another, equally guilty, equally damned. It's a comfortable way to think about evil. Clean, simple, but it's wrong. The Empire contained 3 types of soldiers: those who never questioned, those who questioned and stayed anyway, and those who questioned and broke. Understanding the difference matters more than simple condemnation or cheap absolution ever could. Let's start with the ones who never needed to question, the true believers. Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin didn't stumble into evil. He walked toward it with both eyes open since childhood. His worldview wasn't shaped by Imperial propaganda or institutional pressure. It was forged on the Carrion Plateau of his homeworld, where boyhood lessons taught him that life was an ongoing battle for survival, with the strong and smart staying on top by gaining and keeping control of those below them. The Empire didn't corrupt Tarkin. Tarkin found in the Empire a vehicle for beliefs he already held. His career progression tells you everything. Captain, Admiral, Grand Moff. Each rank a confirmation that the system rewarded exactly what he offered: ruthlessness dressed in the language of order. By the time he stood on the bridge of the Death Star, he wasn't a man following orders from above. He was the man giving them. When he looked at that battle station's super laser, he didn't see a weapon of last resort. He saw efficiency. His own words, a brutally efficient tool to end dissent. His reasoning was crystalline and horrifying. No Imperial star system would dare defy the Emperor if the price was extermination. This wasn't rationalization after Alderaan. This was stated purpose before anyone pulled the trigger. And here's where it gets darker. Tarkin was once asked, hypothetically, whether he would order the destruction of his own homeworld if the Emperor commanded it. His response? He said he would do his duty. With pleasure, even. With pleasure. That's not a man following orders. That's a man who found a system that rewards exactly what he already wanted to do. The Empire didn't make Tarkin a monster. It gave him a uniform and a title and a planet-killing weapon and said, go ahead. Think about what that means for everyone who served under him. Every officer on that bridge. Every gunner manning those targeting systems. Every analyst who calculated firing solutions for planetary bombardment. They weren't working for a reluctant leader, making difficult choices in impossible circumstances. They were working for a man who would burn his own home and enjoy doing it. The chain of command matters here. Imperial officers didn't serve some abstract institution. They served specific commanders with specific philosophies. And when your commanding officer expresses pleasure at the hypothetical destruction of his own homeworld, what does that tell you about the organization you've joined? So yes, some Imperials knew exactly what they served. They weren't confused. They weren't deceived. They weren't victims of circumstance hoping the system would reform from within. They were enthusiastic. But they weren't everyone. Because the Empire also contained people like Bodhi Rook, just a cargo pilot, nobody important, spent his days ferrying supplies, following flight plans, collecting paychecks. The kind of Imperial you'd never notice at a checkpoint, the kind who could serve for years without ever being asked to do anything obviously monstrous. Then Galen Erso handed him a message. Rook learned what the Death Star actually was. Not an orbital platform. Not a defense station. A weapon designed to vaporize entire worlds. And the moment he understood, really understood, he couldn't unknow it. Information itself became the breaking point. His defection was immediate. No gradual disillusionment. No months of doubt. He heard what the Empire had built and what it intended to use, and something inside him snapped. He carried Erso's message to the rebellion, and in doing so became the most wanted man in the galaxy. Both the Empire and the rebellion raced to reach him first. The Empire wanted him dead. Think about that transition. One day you're a cargo pilot with clearance codes and a pension plan. The next day you're the most wanted man in the galaxy. One piece of information. That's all it took. They didn't get him. Not that day. But Rook proved something uncomfortable. The information existed. The truth was knowable. Which means those who didn't know, maybe they chose not to look. Maybe they looked away on purpose. This is the distinction that matters. The difference between ignorance and willful blindness. A cargo pilot has plausible deniability. A cargo pilot just flies where he's told and asks no questions. But Bodhi Rook was a cargo pilot too, and when the information reached him, he acted on it immediately. Same job, same access, different choice. How many other cargo pilots ferried components for weapons they chose not to think about? How many supply officers logged shipments to facilities they knew better than to ask about? How many engineers solved technical problems without asking what the solutions would be used for? The Empire ran on willful blindness. It had to. You can't staff a galaxy-spanning military with enthusiastic monsters. There aren't enough Tarkins to go around. What you can do is create systems where not knowing becomes easier than knowing, where curiosity gets punished and compliance gets rewarded, where the questions you don't ask become the ones you can't ask. This is how bureaucratic evil functions, not through explicit orders to commit atrocity, but through compartmentalization so complete that no single person feels responsible for the whole. The targeting analyst doesn't see the planet burn. The supply officer doesn't know what those crates contain. The cargo pilot doesn't ask where the shipment goes after delivery. Everyone does their small piece. The horror emerges from the aggregate. And then, every once in a while, someone asks anyway. Iden Versio asked. Commander of Inferno Squad, Elite Special Forces, daughter of Admiral Garrick Versio. This wasn't some low-level grunt struggling with basic training. This was a true believer who'd earned her rank through demonstrated excellence and unwavering loyalty. She believed in the Empire because it had worked for her, because she was good at serving it, because her father commanded fleets and she commanded the unit everyone feared. She had every reason not to question. The Versio family represented everything the Empire promised: meritocracy, advancement, power for those who proved themselves worthy. Iden had proven herself, repeatedly, in operations too classified to discuss and missions too dangerous for standard units. Inferno Squad existed because the Empire needed people who could do what regular stormtroopers couldn't, and Iden Versio led them. Then came Operation Cinder. After the Emperor's death at Endor in 4 ABY, contingency orders activated across the galaxy. Scorched Earth. Destroy Imperial worlds before the rebellion could claim them. The Emperor's final spite, encoded as military doctrine. And one of those worlds was Vardos, her homeworld. Vardos had been loyal to the Empire throughout the entire war. This wasn't a planet with rebel sympathies being punished for disloyalty. This was the Empire ordering the destruction of its own faithful. She refused. Not privately, not through subtle sabotage or quiet resignation. She refused to participate in attacks on her homeworld and instead chose to save it. Her crew, Adana Khan, the pilot, and other Inferno Squad members, followed her into defection shortly after the loss of the second Death Star. One person's break triggered more breaks. The doubt had been there, latent, waiting for a catalyst. What makes Versio's defection so significant is who she was before it. Not a reluctant conscript, not a lowly technician with no investment in the system. She was Imperial aristocracy, the daughter of an admiral, the commander of an elite unit. If anyone should have stayed loyal through cognitive dissonance alone, it was her. But Operation Cinder crossed a line that even her family loyalty couldn't justify. This is the pattern that repeats across every documented defection. The doubt existed first. The loyalty was already fractured. What the breaking point provided wasn't new information. It was undeniability. The moment when the thing you'd been avoiding became the thing you had to face. Thane Kyrell faced it at Alderaan. He joined the Empire alongside Sienna Rhee. They joined the Empire together, both believers in order, both convinced that stability required strong central authority. Their paths were supposed to be parallel forever. Same training, same experiences, same relationship. They were supposed to follow the same path. Then Alderaan happened. Kyrell witnessed the destruction. Not second-hand reports, not rumors passed through chain of command. He saw a planet die, an entire population, gone, in the time it takes to blink. He'd also seen, before that moment, how the Empire enslaved populations on the worlds it conquered. The smaller cruelties, the ones that were easier to rationalize as necessary for order, as temporary measures, as the unfortunate cost of galactic stability. Alderaan made rationalization impossible. You can't explain away a planet. You can't contextualize genocide. The Death Star didn't malfunction. It wasn't an accident or a rogue commander exceeding orders. Tarkin personally gave the galaxy a terrifying demonstration of the Death Star's power, incinerating an entire world to make a political point. And Thane Kyrell watched it happen from an Imperial vessel, wearing an Imperial uniform, serving an empire that had just committed genocide on a planetary scale. He defected to the rebellion and spent the rest of the war fighting against everything he'd trained for. Leaving the Empire crushed that dream. The career, the prestige, the sense of purpose that came from serving something larger than himself. All of it, gone, because he couldn't serve a government that could do what he'd seen. It also challenged his close relationship with Sienna, because she made a different choice. Sienna Rhee stayed. Same evidence, same experience, same relationship with someone who'd made the opposite choice. And she stayed. This is where the psychological spectrum gets complicated. We know she wasn't a true believer like Tarkin. She didn't pursue atrocity with enthusiasm. But beyond that, the sources grow quiet. We can speculate about the psychology, career investment, where leaving would mean admitting those years were wasted. Personal obligations, where cultural values around oaths and loyalty made defection feel like personal betrayal. The sunk cost of identity, where she might have built her entire sense of self around being an Imperial officer. But these are guesses. What we know for certain is simpler. Faced with the same evidence that broke Thane Kyrell, Sienna Rhee reached a different conclusion. She stayed anyway. Kyrell helped the rebellion and the New Republic fight the Empire, while still loving Sienna. They were on opposite sides of a war, bound by childhood affection, divided by a moral chasm neither could bridge. The spectrum of conscience could divide not only militaries, but intimate relationships. Their story asks the hardest question. If two people with identical backgrounds, identical information, and genuine love for each other can reach opposite conclusions about the same evil, what does that tell us about moral choice? That's the second category. The ones who saw what they served and stayed anyway. Why did they stay? The reasons are as varied as the people. Fear of what defection would cost. The Empire executed traitors. The belief that leaving would accomplish nothing. One person can't stop a galactic military. The simple, human difficulty of admitting you've been wrong about something you've built your entire identity around. The Empire was full of Siennas. Officers who saw what the Empire did and found ways to justify continuing. Analysts who processed data about atrocities and filed it away without acting on it. Administrators who kept the system running because the system was their livelihood. Soldiers who followed orders because following orders was their job, and they'd seen what Tarkin did to gunners who hesitated at Alderaan. Not monsters, not enthusiasts, just people who couldn't break. But some people found ways to resist without breaking, at least not visibly. Alexander Kallus didn't defect when he experienced his moral awakening. He stayed exactly where he was. ISB agent, Imperial intelligence. The same uniform, the same office, the same colleagues who would execute him if they knew what he was doing. He fed information to the rebellion under the codename Fulcrum while performing loyalty every single day. Think about what that required. Wake up in an Imperial base. Eat in an Imperial mess hall. Salute Imperial officers who would torture you if they discovered your real allegiance. Execute ISB operations that might send stormtroopers to kill rebels. And then, in stolen moments, transmit intelligence that might save those same rebels the next day. The cognitive dissonance alone would destroy most people. Kallus lived in that dissonance, day after day. Every day a performance, every interaction a potential exposure. Every success in his official role potentially meaning deaths in his secret cause. Kanan Jarrus recognized what that cost. He said Kallus risked everything when he defected from the Empire. The word choice matters. When he defected, not when he escaped. Because Kallus proved that defection didn't require physical departure. Conscience could manifest as sabotage from within. The most dangerous rebels weren't always the ones carrying blasters. Sometimes they were the ones carrying clearance codes. Galen Erso took this approach further than anyone, so far that his conscience became invisible even to those watching. He never formally defected. Not once. When director Orson Krennic forced him back into Imperial service to complete Death Star research, Erso made a choice that looks, on the surface, like collaboration. He returned to his post. He wore Imperial insignia. He drew Imperial pay. He built the Empire's most devastating weapon, and he sabotaged every inch of it. Erso pretended to be defeated and obedient, while he designed a secret fatal flaw in the Death Star. Working under the Empire's nose, he made the eventual destruction of the weapon possible. His conscience manifested not through departure, but through corruption of his work's purpose. The same hands that built the superlaser made sure it could be destroyed. A fatal flaw, hidden in the design. Galen Erso knew that if the plans ever reached the right people, his weapon would have a weakness. And he made sure those plans had a way to escape. How do you categorize that? He served the Empire until his death. He also made the rebellion's greatest victory possible. He followed orders. He also ensured those orders would ultimately fail. He was complicit in building a genocide machine. He was also the reason that machine could be stopped. The psychological spectrum doesn't sort cleanly. Then there were the ones who never got the chance to choose, because the Empire chose for them. Jai Kell was just a cadet at the Imperial Academy. Young, promising. The kind of recruit the Empire loves. Obedient, capable, eager to prove himself. He believed in what he was doing. He wanted to serve. Then the Grand Inquisitor identified him as Force-sensitive. In any reasonable system, this would mean advancement, special training, recognition of unique talents that could serve the institution. In the Empire, it meant elimination. Force-sensitive individuals outside Imperial control were threats, not assets. Threats. When the Grand Inquisitor found one inside an Imperial Academy, the response wasn't recruitment. It was termination. Kell was marked for death by the institution he dedicated himself to serving. His defection, facilitated by Ezra Bridger and Zer Leonis, saved his life, but put him and his mother at new risk. He went from loyal cadet to hunted fugitive in the span of a single day, not because of anything he chose, but because of what he was. The Empire created defectors through its own internal policies. People who might have served loyally for entire careers were pushed toward rebellion by the regime's categorization of certain identities as threats requiring elimination. Kell didn't choose conscience. Conscience was forced on him by an institution that wanted him dead. One unnamed Imperial trooper defected after witnessing Leia Organa's torture aboard the first Death Star. Just watching. That was enough. Seeing what the Empire did to a prisoner, a senator, a princess, someone with standing and connections, and understanding that this was standard procedure. If they would torture a princess, what would they do to you? The realization that torture wasn't an aberration, but a tool. That the institution you served had chambers designed for this purpose, and personnel trained in this function. That somewhere in the Imperial bureaucracy, someone had budgeted for interrogation equipment, and someone else had approved the line item. You want to know the cruelest irony? Some Imperials only learned what they served when it turned on them. Now, the question everyone's been waiting for. What happened when the second Death Star exploded? 4. A, B, Y. Battle of Endor. The Emperor dead. Vader dead. The fleet in chaos. And somewhere inside that battle station, a station carrying enough personnel to populate a city, an evacuation order went out. Non-essential crew. That phrase tells you everything and nothing. Non-essential to whom? Essential by what criteria? Who decides, in the final minutes before a reactor goes critical, which lives matter and which don't? The official record states that just prior to the destruction, a large amount of non-essential crew underwent an evacuation order. That's the language. Passive voice. Underwent. As if evacuation were something that happened to people, rather than something people desperately scrambled to achieve. Here's what we know happened in the command structure. Admiral Firmus Piet stood on the bridge of the Executor, the superstar destroyer that served as his flagship. The Emperor had ordered him to hold position and prevent any rebel retreat. The rebels, in a desperate gambit, moved their remaining fleet into direct combat with his armada, hoping the Death Star would cease fire rather than risk friendly casualties. Piet ordered all guns to intensify forward firepower. Seconds later, an RZ-1 A-Wing interceptor, piloted by Arvel Crinid, took turbolaser fire and spun toward the bridge. The sources describe Piet's final moment with brutal precision. He whipped round, saw the fighter barreling straight for him, and reflexively, but futilely, dived for cover. An admiral dove for cover. Think about that image. One of the most powerful military commanders in the galaxy, responsible for a vessel kilometers long, surrounded by the most advanced technology the Empire could produce. And in his final second, he dove for cover like any frightened human being would. The A-Wing crashed into the bridge. The Executor lost control and slammed into Death Star 2. Piet died in an expanding plume of flame. If an admiral experienced that kind of desperate, futile survival instinct in his final seconds, what do you think was happening in the corridors of the Death Star itself? The compressed timeline made organized evacuation nearly impossible. Lando Calrissian and Wedge Antilles were already destroying the power regulator when the reactor began its terminal cascade. As they escaped back into the shaft, the crippled reactor collapsed and detonated. Minutes, maybe less. The time between "we should evacuate" and "there is no more station," measured in heartbeats. The aftermath scattered across the galaxy, literally. The hypermatter core explosion created a minor wormhole at its collapse, dispersing significant portions of wreckage through hyperspace itself. Debris that couldn't exist in one place anymore existed in many places. Even personal effects were scattered. Darth Vader's glove passed through the hyperspace anomaly and ended up somewhere else entirely. The physics of the destruction defied normal catastrophe. Debris that reached the nearby moon of Kef Bir fell into the ocean and poisoned the waters around it. Large pieces. The Alliance put significant effort into stopping remaining debris from colliding with the Endor moon itself, using tractor beams to ensure falling material didn't devastate the world where the Ewoks lived. And the records? Imperial records were sent into a state of disarray, with numerous missing persons and unconfirmed dead or wounded. Disarray. The polite word for chaos. The bureaucratic term for "we don't know who lived and who died, and we may never know." Here's the uncomfortable truth about what happened during those final minutes. The available historical record contains no verified instances of violence between Imperials during the evacuation. No documented incidents of officers shooting each other to reach escape pods. No named perpetrators. No named victims. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means that if it happened, those records were either suppressed before the Empire's collapse, never systematically documented by Rebel or New Republic historians who had other priorities, occurred on too localized a scale to be preserved in broader accounts, or, and this is the most disturbing possibility, occurred in a timeline so compressed that organized conflict never had time to develop. People simply died before they could fight each other. The destruction was too fast for panic to organize itself into violence. We know the Empire falsified records about Endor. Imperial propaganda claimed that billions of tons of metal rained down on the moon and wiped out the Ewoks. This was spread by Imperial agents as justification for the defeat. See, the rebels killed the innocent Ewoks by destroying our battle station. A complete fabrication. The moon and its Ewok population remained in good health long after the Death Star's destruction. If the Empire would invent a genocide that didn't happen to score propaganda points, what would it suppress about scenes that made its personnel look desperate, cowardly, or murderous toward each other? The ships that escaped tell their own stories. The Vigilance received orders from Admiral Sloan to form up surviving TIE fighters during the battle's conclusion. The Corvus evacuated Inferno Squad, though Iden Versio would defect shortly after, meaning the Empire saved personnel who would immediately turn against it. The Eviscerator stayed behind to assist ground evacuation operations on the moon's surface. The Ravager, that super star destroyer with its ugly name, had been ordered away from Endor before the battle even started. Someone knew to pull the Ravager out early. Someone thought about which ships mattered enough to save. And someone, somewhere, decided who was non-essential. What happened to the survivors? The Empire didn't end at Endor. It fragmented, splintered into competing factions led by warlords and admirals who each believed they should inherit what remained. Some carved out their own domains in the Outer Rim. Others attempted to maintain central authority. The unified command structure that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 decades dissolved into competing fiefdoms. Operation Cinder, the scorched earth policy that broke Iden Versio, activated across multiple worlds, including Vardos. The Empire turned its weapons on itself, on its own loyal worlds, as punishment for failure. The Emperor's final spite, encoded in contingency orders that activated upon his death. For the true believers, the ones who'd always known what they served and embraced it, the collapse was a tactical setback, not a moral reckoning. They kept fighting. They joined the remnants. They found new warlords to serve, or became warlords themselves. Men like Tarkin died with the first Death Star, but the ideology that made Tarkin possible didn't die with him. For the willfully blind, the ones who'd chosen not to see, the collapse forced a confrontation with everything they'd avoided. Some found ways to continue avoiding, new rationalizations, new justifications, new reasons why they'd never really been part of the bad things. The Empire made us do it. We didn't know. We were just following orders. The excuses that let you sleep at night. Others couldn't maintain the denial anymore. The scale of what the Empire had done became impossible to ignore when the Empire stopped existing to contain it. When the propaganda ceased, and the records opened, and the survivors told their stories, the willfully blind had to choose, keep the blindness, or see at last what they'd served. For the ones who'd broken, the defectors, the answer was complicated. Some had died in rebellion service, Biggs Darklighter at Yavin, countless others at Scarif and Hoth, and 100 smaller battles. Their moral reckonings ended in fire. They'd chosen their side, and their side had killed them before they could see whether it won. Others survived to see the New Republic form. Wedge Antilles, Iden Versio, Alexander Callus. They'd proven their loyalty through combat, through intelligence work, through years of service to the cause they'd chosen when they broke from the one they'd been born into. But the uniform they'd worn before didn't disappear from their histories. The New Republic had to decide what to do with millions of former Imperial personnel. Not the leadership, those faced tribunals, at least the ones who survived long enough to be captured. Not the defectors, those had proven themselves through sacrifice. But the middle category, the ones who'd followed orders without enthusiasm, the ones who'd kept their heads down, the ones who'd maybe had doubts but never acted on them. What do you do with an entire generation who served a genocide machine and claimed they didn't know? Some were prosecuted.
Some were rehabilitated.
Some simply melted back into civilian life and never spoke about what they'd done. The galaxy was too broken to examine every conscience. There wasn't time. There wasn't infrastructure. There were worlds to rebuild and governments to form, and the threat hadn't ended. It had just dispersed. The question never got answered. Not really. Not for everyone. So, did any Imperials realize they were the baddies? Some of them named their ships Persecutor and Ravager and Intimidator, and never thought twice about what those names meant. Some of them pulled the triggers on Alderaan and said they would do it again with pleasure. Some of them ferried cargo for years and never asked what they were ferrying until Galen Erso's message made it impossible to unknow. Some of them watched their homeworlds burn under Imperial guns and couldn't pretend anymore. Some of them stayed inside the machine, feeding information to the enemy, dying slowly in the gap between who they were and who they pretended to be. Some of them built the weapon and then built the weakness into the weapon. Some of them never questioned because questioning never occurred to them. Some of them questioned every day and stayed anyway. And some of them questioned once at exactly the right moment and broke. The uncomfortable truth isn't that Imperials were all monsters. It isn't that they were all victims. It's that they were human beings making choices inside a system designed to make evil feel like duty. Some chose to see. Some chose not to. Some saw and served anyway. Some saw and couldn't. The next time someone asks whether there were good ones among them, the honest answer is, define good. Because understanding why someone followed orders isn't the same as excusing them for following orders. And condemning an entire military as evil doesn't explain why some of them stopped following orders when it mattered. Tarkin would have burned his own homeworld with pleasure. Iden Versio refused to let them burn hers. Same uniform, same empire, same capacity for choice. The difference is what they did with it. Subscribe for more stories like this.